What is North Korea after, and how far will they go to achieve it? Those questions will be just the beginning of the discussions at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to be held in New York in just under 7 hours' time. How high are the stakes? It depends on how far North Korea is prepared to go. But a rogue state controlled by a murderous psychopath armed with interballistic missiles that's claiming it's testing hydrogen bombs is a country in need of judicious management, obviously. Perhaps China is the answer. North Korea's border with China is 1,400 kilometres long, and China often turns a blind eye to its posturings because the alternative is a pro-Western neighbour, and China doesn't want that. But with the latest testing causing a magnitude 6.3 tremor felt strongly in parts of China, suddenly Beijing has to respond. John F. Kirby is a retired Rear Admiral in the US Navy who was spokesperson for the US Department of State. He's now military and diplomatic analyst for CNN. I asked him what I thought was an almost impossible question to answer. What exactly is North Korea after?
Actually, I don't think that's all that difficult a question to answer. It's pretty apparent that their end game is to the preservation of the regime and the governing structure as they know it. And they believe that the only real obstacle to the preservation of the regime is the United States of America. And therefore, they realize that in their mind, in their reasoning, the only way to stop that existential threat is to have a nuclear ballistic missile capability that can threaten the United States, to throw us off kilter, to preserve their ability to keep the regime in power, to be an ultimate deterrent. And that is what they want more than anything else. And that is why they have been so impervious to sanctions. That is why they have been impervious to diplomacy and to dialogue. And it is why, quite frankly, they have been impervious to military threats, or they see it as threats, or military deterrence and military readiness between the United States, South Korea, and Japan. They are impervious to those military deterrents because this is what they want more than anything else. They want the ultimate insurance policy. And I think just recent history bears out that, in fact, they are advancing those capabilities at a faster clip than anybody previously had given them credit for being able to do.
If they are impervious to the United States, South Korea and Japan, what risk are they running by antagonizing China?
Well, frankly, that is the only real risk here that I think, and even the Trump administration has realized, that I think they're running up against. There's only one nation-state in the world that has any influence in Pyongyang, and that is China. Now, China has not used that influence fully. They have not implemented all the sanctions the way they should have. They have not tried to use any of their leverage over Pyongyang with trade to try to change the calculus there. And that is because China has been willing to concede and to live with a nuclear-armed North if a nuclear-armed North can be a hedge against a Western-allied South and a reunified peninsula. The only thing that the Chinese want less than a provocateur in Pyongyang is American troops camped out on the other side of the Yalu River. They don't want a reunified peninsula, at least not one that's reunified in a quick, sort of chaotic fashion, because, of course, A, that'll mean refugees streaming across their border into China, which they don't want to have to deal with, and B, again, they don't want a unified peninsula that is allied with the West, and therefore a threat on one of their borders. So their calculus has been to try to sort of let this thing go a little bit and not put too much pressure on Pyongyang so that they can preserve that hedge.
What happens now? Gosh, as I listen to you speak, there are so many conflicting interests. The Chinese situation, if you assume a Chinese point of view, makes absolute sense. Why on earth would they want American troops on their border? So that makes sense from their point of view. The North Koreans, as you say, are simply trying to preserve and protect a psychopathic regime, and they, as you say, are impervious to South Korea, to Japan and America. So how can there be a resolution here where all the parties survive and save face?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't really think we're on the brink of war on the peninsula. I really don't. And if you listen to Secretary Mattis today as he left the White House, I mean, he was very clear that we absolutely will defend ourselves if we come under attack here in the United States. We have that ability and will do it in an overwhelming way. But he is the last guy who wants to do that. And I don't think we're on the brink of war. I mean, honestly, the only thing that changed between today and yesterday is that now they have, obviously, this much higher kiloton yield and ability, nuclear ability. But we don't know that they really do have the ability to put a warhead on a missile and launch it accurately over great distances. So there's the point I'm trying to make is there's still time for diplomacy here. There's still time for dialogue. Now, I'll be the first to admit that Pyongyang has no incentive right now to talk. They have the momentum. They have the initiative. They are advancing these capabilities. There's very little interest on their part in sitting down to talk. There's very little interest, I think, in the Trump administration right now to restore bilateral dialogue or even unilateral dialogue directly with the North. And I understand that. I do understand why there's reticence to do that. You don't want to reward bad behavior. What you need to do are two things. And I think, quite frankly, despite the President Trump's his tweets, I think in general the administration is pursuing this properly. And the two things are, one, an international pressure campaign. Continue to ratchet up pressure on them. If they can enact tougher, newer sanctions, particularly against oil in the North, real significant oil sanctions that are fully implemented by Beijing, you could actually have a real impact on Pyongyang's ability to advance this program and to keep their economy going. Number two, and that is trying to find a way back to the table. Now, clearly, again, we're not going to go to the negotiating table anytime soon directly with the North. But what we need to do is we need to work closer with Beijing to reassure Beijing of our interests on the peninsula and what they are, and just as importantly, what they aren't. Again, if Beijing is worried about a unified peninsula that's done violently, that throws millions of refugees into their border, and they're worried about a unified peninsula that is allied with the West, we have to assure Beijing that that's not our goal. And we've tried to do that. Tillerson and Mattis, our Secretary of State and our Secretary of Defense, have made it clear that we're not after a violently restored peninsula, that we don't want regime change. We're trying to message Beijing overtly that it's actually in their interests to try to bring this about diplomatically. And that really is the right approach, and I think they need to do that more. What I'm not seeing, what I'd like to see more out of the Trump administration is pressure on Beijing, not just overt pressure, but trying to convince them that their calculus here, their reasoning, their logic is flawed, and that they have no reason to fear a restoration of some sort of diplomatic dialogue between the six parties and getting the North back to the table. We have to reassure China that we're not trying to get American troops camped out on the other side of the Yalu, that we aren't after regime change, and that we don't want violence on the peninsula. I don't think the Chinese are completely convinced of that, and I think that's why they have been hedging their bets the way they have.
Admiral Kirby, we are so grateful for your time. One final question. Who is the person who is best able, on behalf of the White House, to reassure China of those things? Is it Defense Secretary Jim Mattis? Is he the man for that job?
I think both Mattis and Tillerson are the right couple here to approach this. And I don't want to slight our UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. I actually think she's working this very, very hard, and she has a role to play. But in terms of really making an impact in Beijing, it's got to come from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, and it has to be a team effort, and the Chinese need to see that it is a team effort, that both of them are serious about what they're saying and can lay out this logic for them in very clear ways. I think they're saying all the right things publicly. What I don't know is happening, and maybe it is, but I'm just not seeing it, that we're actually having these kinds of meaningful conversations directly with leaders in Beijing to convince them that really it's in their interests to use the influence that we know they have on Pyongyang in a more concerted way.
That was former Admiral John Kirby, who was also a State Department spokesperson, talking about the situation which is confronting the Security Council. They meet at 2 a.m. New Zealand time, so what's that, 7 hours or so, just under 7 hours from now.